You know, I have to say, I've always thought that the national poverty line was more of a political construct, right? Designed for politicians to say we've made progress, right? When they never really truly changed lives. Oh, the poverty line is here, and you're making a grand more. We've done you a big favor. Vote for me. Well, my next guest is taking this whole proposition to a whole new level, and everyone has a strong opinion about his Substack titled How a Broken Benchmark Quietly Brought America Down. Let's bring in now Simplify Asset Management, their chief strategist, Mike Green. My man. Golly, people are going nuts. First, I just want the idea of what made you even go down this rabbit hole.
Well, what actually sent me down this, we'd actually talked about a couple of the pieces that I've done before on this, where I was just candidly horrified by the reaction that we saw on Twitter to a right-wing influencer posting a somewhat inaccurate picture of a house saying, in 1950, a single income could afford this, right? There was an incredibly coordinated and messaging backlash that basically boiled down to, what possible right do you have to expect this? You're nothing, right? That framework ultimately sent me down a path of saying, hey, wait a second, this is actually really missing something that people are trying to convey. And as I dug into the numbers, and I wrote this on my piece, I was candidly horrified, because as somebody who comes out of the financial world, who has done very well and is incredibly appreciative for it, and whose children have been successful,
right?
I look at this and I'm like, this is something I never really spent a lot of time thinking about.
Right.
But the minute you dig into it, you discover that there's actually a terrible story out there.
So maybe you were living in an ivory tower and didn't know it?
I absolutely knew I was living in an ivory tower. My life is like, very few people have this.
The real math of survival, though. So we're talking about real survival, real poverty line. Child care, 32,000. Housing, 23,000. Food, almost 15,000. Transportation, almost 15,000. Health care, almost 11,000. Other essentials, 22,000. Add in taxes. You're saying the real poverty line is 140,000, essentially.
It is very close. And I want to just be clear that 140,000 doesn't mean you are literally poor, right? We're not talking about, country poor sort of stuff. What I'm describing there is that's really the threshold at which you can cover all of the expenses without government assistance and start saving, right? Start preparing for your future. That's a very, very different place than most people think it is.
Now, obviously, people hit you and saying, and you talked about this a little bit in the piece, that, hey, it's a lot different in Mississippi than it is in Manhattan.
It's a lot different in Mississippi, and what's been so interesting to me is actually the anger and frustration and resentment of that number is typically coming from people who don't have kids. Right? I see a lot of young, informed, intelligent commentators like, this is absolutely ridiculous, $32,000 for childcare. And in the meantime, the vast majority of my comments that are coming in are from people who are actually in that situation saying you're 100% right. This is exactly my experience.
The lies, the housing lie, the hedonic lie. What's the housing lie?
Well, the story with the housing lie is this idea that you can afford to buy this house if you just be willing to settle. And this goes back to the piece that I wrote before. An individual had said, look, the problem is everybody expects larger houses today. They expect nicer houses today. Well, the reality is they expected that in 1955 as well. The homes that were being built at 1,100 to 1,200 square foot at that time period were dramatic improvements. Many people are now out saying 20% of the homes in 1950 didn't have indoor plumbing. 0% of the new houses in 1950 didn't have indoor plumbing. They were all being brought up to standards of the day. If you look at that exact same house today, it is nowhere near affordable. It is impossible for most families in a place like Essex County, New Jersey, which was the area that I was responding to in the initial post. They just can't afford it. There's nothing there for them.
The optical illusion of prosperity, what's that about?
Well, we absolutely have progressed as a society, right? I'm sitting on this stage wearing very nice clothes in a warm air conditioned or warm HVAC serviced environment. My life is dramatically richer and better than my grandfather's life was. But the reality is that base level of participation, the level at which I can start to contribute and start to benefit from how society has improved, has risen alongside that.
One of my favorite guests, a really great thinker, Colin Roach, responded. And then you responded to his response, and you said, there's never been a better time to be born into human existence than this very instance. And the only time is the next instance, right? On this, we agree. But is that really true anymore? That was always, it always felt like that was the American promise. But is that the case right now? Because, again, going back to what I see on social media, particularly from young folks, they'll show a picture of some old couple dancing, say, yeah, they're dancing because they sold their house for $2 million they bought with a bag of apples. A lot of people don't believe this is true anymore.
This is one of the challenges, right? You try to speak an element of truth and people immediately attack you as ignoring all the other components of it. I firmly believe that now is the best time to be born, and the only time better would be in the next minute, right? As human beings, we have an incredible capacity for affection and innovation and social support of each other. Right now, we're just caught in a framework in which we're not doing that. And people are trying to say, if you're talking badly about the current situation, you aren't appreciative and you don't understand how much better it is than when we were slaves in serfdom. There is absolutely truth to that.